Welcome to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Nancy Path, the President-elect of the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. Thank you so much for joining me, Nancy.
Thank you.
So, full disclosure to our listeners that you and I have known each other for probably 15 years, at least 15 years. You are a real estate agent, and for many years I was a social media consultant way back in the day when social media was new. So for a time, you were my client, and I have been your client far more recently in both selling a house and purchasing a house. So we go a long way back, and we have seen a lot of changes in real estate in that time. But there's probably no greater question mark in the minds of our listeners right now as to whether or not people are actually buying and selling homes during a pandemic. And what would your short answer to that be, Nancy?
I would say that yes, they are buying homes in droves.
Which is astonishing because it's very counterintuitive to think that somebody would voluntarily list their house or buy a house when there's so much uncertainty in the economy. What have you found in I know you're looking at the numbers, but what have you found just talking to buyers and sellers and also your fellow agents?
So I think that certainly the sellers that I have been working with have know the risks associated with putting their home on the market. I had been staying in contact with them from the beginning in terms of what the governor has been saying and whether we can show properties, and they understand the risks and are willing to take them. No one has been shy at all about, at least not my clients. Now, I do know that some houses did go off the market at the very beginning of the pandemic, but for the most part, the people are putting their houses on the market and not thinking twice about it.
Well, I've seen under contract signs go up here in my neighborhood for houses that have been on the market a very brief time. And, of course, I love my neighborhood, and I think people should be like, wow, I can buy a house in this neighborhood. But I want to talk a little bit about the tools that make this possible, because back when I started working corporately for Long & Foster in the 1980s, the new technology back then was fax machines. And even in 1987, the branch offices didn't all have fax machines. In fact, it was a big debate as to whether it was even worthwhile to put a fax machine in every branch office in 1987. And then legislation had to be passed that actually made faxed signatures valid legal documents. So that was not that long ago. We're talking like maybe, 34 years ago?
Right.
34 years ago, fax was the tech, and I can remember bitter discussions about receptionists in our branch offices who were like, no one's going to use voicemail. People want to talk to a human being. And then came cell phones, some of them big as like purses. I had one of those. Email, computers, websites with listings, because back in the day, if you wanted to know what was available on the market, you looked in the newspaper on Sunday, or you looked for open house signs, or you went to a branch office and they had the listings printed out on a weekly updated catalog. And so when you think how far we've come in just 3 decades, and the fact that people can e-sign documents, apply for mortgages online, the fact that you can actually, from start to finish, from deciding to list your house, to marketing your house, to showing your house, to closing on your house, to moving, can all be done in a pandemic is nothing short of amazing to me, that we have in such a short time developed a way to do business in a situation like this. Now, I know you became a real estate agent in the mid to later 90s?
Yeah, that's correct. I actually got licensed in 1994 and started by selling new construction, and then switched over to general brokerage, which is where I work for a real estate company and can help buyers and sellers in 1997. And we definitely have seen a lot of changes in the last 30 plus years. I remember when everything's were faxed, and the contracts became so illegible that we had to rewrite them so that lenders could read the contracts. So we went from faxing contracts to sending them, and you had to print them out and sign them and then scan it back, to now everything is done electronically. The majority of people will sign contracts electronically, and they just love it. It takes 2 minutes. It's very simple. It's a very simple process. And so a lot of the work that I do as a realtor, except for showing properties, can be done out of my home office. So everything I'm doing is virtual for the most part. I mean, I go to houses, obviously, but for the most part, it's virtual.
And this is remarkable, too, because people are very mobile, and the fact that smartphones and mobile devices allow you to e-sign documents. I can remember you sent me a contract that needed to be ratified when I was standing in the middle of South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. And you're like, we need to ratify this contract because there was an offer, and I'm like, I'm at a conference in Austin, and it was like no problem. And I did the whole thing from my phone. I'll never get over that was even possible.
I know, it's pretty amazing. I actually I had someone ask me a question last night about a property. He had seen a property that went under contract just yesterday. Within 3 days, he wanted more information. And I have an app on my phone, and I plugged in the address and forwarded the listing to him so he could see all the details of that property. And it took me all of less than a minute.
And that is remarkable because a lot of consumers will start their searches online, and there's a variety of different websites where you can look for properties that are for sale. And there's basic general information on that website, like the listing price or the square footage or the amenities or what school districts it's in. But real estate agents, professional realtors have access to information sort of behind that screen. And I think we should pause here to remind people that being a real estate agent is a career. It's a professional career. You have to be licensed. You have to do continuing education. You have to have skills. You take classes in ethics. There are rules and guidelines for how you conduct yourself in a transaction. And so for many people who might be wondering, like, well, why do we need real estate agents if all of the information is online available for me to see? Explain a little bit about how the fact that not everything is what you can see, what the consumer can see.
So I think that part of real estate is experience, right? When you talk to another professional, they rely heavily on their experience, whether it's an attorney or a doctor. They're going by what they've seen in the past. And a realtor, especially a realtor that works full-time and is taking classes, and, I have spent the last 2 months paying attention to the governor's addresses to the state regarding the COVID-19 virus, because I need to know how that affected my business and affects my clients' transactions. I am reading articles. I am listening to webinars. I heard an economist, Virginia Realtors economist, talk about how the virus has affected real estate transactions and the graphs, and I'm looking at graphs and I'm looking at data to share with my clients. Well, a lot of that data is available to the public, and that's part of it. But the other part is just experience. And websites like Zillow or Realtor.com just don't give you that experience. Or frankly, they don't even walk into a house. So prior to the pandemic, a lot of times you would walk into a home and you would tour it to see what it looked like, how the condition was, because I will tell you, sometimes you can walk into a house that looks fantastic in pictures, and you walk in it and you're very disappointed. And other times you look at a house and the pictures are horrible and the house is fantastic, right? Which is
right.
shame on you for
Well,
that one.
And so what you're talking about is basically you're a professional who, like a doctor or a lawyer, is guiding somebody through an experience. So for those
Right.
of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and my guest is Nancy Pav, who is the president-elect of the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. And we are talking tonight about what real estate looks like in the time of pandemic. And Nancy was just explaining that while you can get a lot of information online, that information is not necessarily the most germane information in your decision-making process. So people go online, they think they want to see a house. In this day and age, Nancy, what are they going to do if they are like, well, I think I'm interested, or this is my dream home. I've seen this posted on social media. Oh, I think I've just found my dream home. Is it crazy for us to buy a house right now? For someone who thinks they found their dream home today, what would they do? What would be the next steps?
So in the environment that we're in right now, I would say, well, the first thing I would say is they need to make sure they're pre-qualified to buy the property. A lot of agents are not allowing people to show homes unless they can prove that they've gone through the financing options, or their financing. So in essence, they don't want tire kickers looking at the house. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, I would say, is that they want to drive by the property. So before even walking in the door, drive by the house. You may decide once you've driven by the house that maybe not so much. You're not that interested anymore. If after you've driven by it and you've gotten your qualification, then you can set up an appointment to see the home. What a lot of agents are doing is they're doing virtual tours and videos of their properties so that you can see them before you walk in the door and kind of have a good feel. But there's nothing like walking in a house to feel it. I know this may sound crazy, but some houses have a good feeling. Some of them come across as kind of sad. Some of them smell not so good. Some of them don't look so good. So you really do, I do believe you need to see the property before you sink your money into it. But what agents are doing is they are requiring that you, some agents are saying you need to have your own hand sanitizers, your own booties, your own gloves, wear a mask. I think that masks are easy enough. I'm not sure where people are getting gloves, so that's a little bit of a challenge. But some of the stuff you can work around. Other agents, what I'm doing in my listings is I'm requesting that the seller keep all the interior lights on and all the interior doors open so that when someone walks into the property, they don't have to touch anything, okay?
That's
and that they
smart.
can come in and out of a room without touching doorknobs, that type of thing.
Right.
We're also limiting the number of people in a house at any given time. So if one person is showing at 1 o'clock, the next person can't come in till 2 o'clock. Prior to the virus, you could have multiple groups go to your house at the same time. And there's a thought process behind that, which is the more people that are in there, it sort of creates a sense of urgency. But
Right.
because of the virus, we've stopped that, and it's only one group at a time as they go through the house. To limit, to make sure that everybody's safe. I mean, the goal of this is to make sure that the seller's safe and that the prospective buyers are safe. We all want to be safe, and so we're trying to come up with some ideas to make it safe. But I think if you follow those steps and definitely drive by the house first before you make an appointment, you can eliminate properties before you ever go into them.
So you touched on something that I think we should do a deeper dive on, and that is getting mortgage financing. When Tom and I decided that we had found our dream home back last August, it's not like we had a Rolodex full of loan officers at our disposal, and so we asked you to make a recommendation, and you gave us several people, and we found a mortgage loan officer that we love a lot. Leslie Wish is great. And back to your point about this is your profession. This is what you do every day. It's your day job. And therefore you have relationships with people that you know are reliable, they're good, they're ethical, they're efficient, they have good teams. And I have found that that is an asset when you work with a really good real estate agent, is that they can guide you to professionals you wouldn't otherwise be able to find unless you just took a shot in the dark. So if people have decided that they are interested in looking at a house and there is this requirement, how do they find a mortgage lender?
So I would say, me personally, I would say that they should talk to their real estate agent. Their real estate agent has a loan officer or 2 or 3 that they work with traditionally. And here's why it's beneficial to the buyer. If I have a loan officer that I work with that screws up, they're out of my list. Okay, and so
right.
they want to make sure they do a good job for you, because it reflects back to me. And if they don't do a good job for you, I'm not going to use them again. Whereas if you could go to Rocket Mortgage or Quicken Loans or online, and find a lender, they don't care. They don't. You are a number to them. You are not a person, and I'm also just a number to them. And they don't care if they get more business from me. And so them wanting to do business with me is a positive for the buyer, because they will make sure to do a good job.
Exactly. And then there's a lot of other things too, because depending on which side of the transaction you're on, you need a termite inspection, or if you're buying, you need a home inspection, or you need a radon inspection, or maybe there's, a question about the foundation and you need an engineer. These are people that most buyers and sellers do not have access to, don't know where to look, don't know who's qualified. So to me, real estate agents, a primary role for an agent is to assemble a team of other professionals necessary to make the transaction go.
Absolutely. I have all sorts of people that are in my online Rolodex, and a lot of them I can call up and ask a question. I can get quotes for how much things cost from people that I work with, because once again, they want my business. And so if I can use them for their expertise to help my clients, and it's really helpful. But I also know, same as with the lender, if they're not good, they're not staying in my online Rolodex. So they need to, I make sure I do some vetting, and a lot of times how I vet the people is they come to my house. And if I don't like how they're working, I'm not referring them to my clients. So I make sure to, I look at them myself.
You're taking them for a test drive, which is really smart.
I am.
For those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And here on Radio Fairfax tonight, we are talking with Nancy Pav, who is the president-elect of the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. And we are going over what it looks like right now in the middle of a pandemic to be buying and selling real estate and what that involves. And basically, having a good real estate agent is an important part of the process, because there's a lot of moving parts to either listing and selling a property or being on the buyer side and making sure that what you're buying is what you think you're buying, and that you are fully aware of any problems that the property might have. So if somebody wanted to list their property under these circumstances, Nancy, one of the questions I would have is, how do you get photos of the property? How do you get the listing up? I mean, do we talk on the telephone? Do we meet? How do you do a listing presentation? How do we get to know each other? What does that look like right now?
So I think that there's a combination of ways to do it. So the first thing you can do is, everybody knows that Zoom is the new way to do the meetings, online meetings. We can do a Zoom call to initially talk. I can send my listing presentation via email, and we can we can go over that together to start with. We can also do FaceTime or Facebook Messenger. We can have a conversation on Facebook Messenger where we're face to face, and then I get the opportunity to look at the house. I had one client in early April who put her house on the market, and before we got together, I called her up, we did FaceTime, and she gave me a tour of her house. That's a great starting point, but I do like to see the house because I look around and I'm looking for items that I think would be red flagged by a buyer, and if we can fix them before you go on the market, that's preferable. So I really need to see the house in detail because I'm looking up to the ceiling and down to the floor and all around, and really looking for even the smallest of details. So the listing agreement, just like contracts, the listing agreements are signed online, so we don't need to be in person for that. And frankly, if someone is concerned and they're okay with me being in their house, I could be in their house without them if they want to stand outside or vice versa, although I do want to see the inside of the house. And then so we can figure out if there's any work that needs to be done. In terms of photographs, we do have photographers that are still working. I've had 4 listings go up in the last couple of weeks, and I have not had a problem getting a photographer out there. Now, I do ask them how they want to work. Some want to be by themselves. Some don't want anybody in the house with them while they're taking the photos. So we work around the photos, but for the most part, I really haven't had any problems with getting houses photographed or videos.
Well, that's good to hear because, like I said, this is a process. And I know that when we sold our property, our condo in August of last year, you were very helpful, too, in telling us things that we would not have thought of ourselves, like take down all your family pictures, reduce the books on the bookcase by half. I mean, a condo is a small space. I mean, you just had a lot of things that made it show better. And let's face it, how it shows, it's not just the bones of the house. That, as you said, you get a sense when you walk into a property. Properties speak to you. You have a feeling about a property. If it speaks to you or it doesn't. But people's first impression and how it shows really makes a huge difference. And one of those things, too, is that it needs to be clean. I can remember Dennis Bruce saying, people don't mind if it's old, but they don't want to buy your dirt. And
yes, that's true. So I have a tip for people if they're thinking about putting their house on the market, but they're not quite ready. What I recommend people do is, if you want to see how your home looks to other people, pull out your cell phone and take a picture, and then look at the picture of the room and see how it looks. A lot of times you can say, oh, this really doesn't look good in pictures, and because a picture and what a house looks like are 2 different things. So if you want to know how your house looks, just take a picture.
That is a good suggestion. I think the other thing we need to touch on, too, is that when people come out to look at your house, where your house is located, the neighborhood it's located in, also makes an impression. So when someone finds a house and they're like, oh, this is my dream house, making the drive, especially from where you work to where you live, becomes important too. Right now there's no traffic out on the roads, right? But if you are buying a house, let's say out in Loudoun County and you work in Tyson's Corner, one of the things to consider too is your commute, distance and time, but also what it feels like to drive into a neighborhood and what the routes are.
Absolutely. So for the most part, people who live locally really know what the traffic's like. So I don't talk to locals about traffic. They already have a handle on it. But if I have someone that's relocating out of the area, that's exactly what I say is, okay, if you get the opportunity, I really recommend, you drive from the house to the office in the morning during rush hour or vice versa. I can tell people all day long how long their commute's going to be, but they don't believe me.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
But, I don't, and I'm not making it up. I'm not trying to scare them, but, if you're telling me you want a 45-minute commute from D.C., you need to live in Arlington, right? I mean, So driving it for some people is really, kind of solidifies that point.
Yeah. It does. And again, neighborhoods, and we have talked many times about the neighborhood I live in now, this is the second time I've lived in this neighborhood, has a feel for it. And I've had contractors come out, somebody came and worked on the garage door and landscapers, and they're like, this is such a beautiful neighborhood. I never even knew this was back here. And there's lots of neighborhoods like that all over Northern Virginia that you just don't even know they're there.
That's the other reason you need a realtor, is because you might not know they're there, but a good realtor will know they're there. And if the realtor's asking you questions about what it is you're looking for in a home, they can point you to the neighborhood that you didn't even know that was there. There's a neighborhood in Leesburg that is very small. It's close to everything, but it's not on top of everything. And people are just very thrilled to be there, even though they didn't know it was there to start with. And so a good realtor knows the neighborhoods and knows, after talking to you, what it is, where you'll want to be.
I know that you do a buyer's assessment when you are working with buyers, and we should probably just nuts and bolts. There's generally an agent that represents the seller, and there's a different agent that represents the buyer. And sometimes it's the same agent, but for the most part, how an agent represents a buyer in a transaction is different from how the seller is represented. And so when you do a buyer's assessment, it really is, before you start running people around to houses they think they might be interested in, it's really trying to understand what their priorities are in looking for a house. Like, what is the thing that's most important to them, and what are things that would be nice to have, but are really not, they're negotiable. So, when we come back from a break, and we are going to go to a brief break, I do want to talk a little bit about how you work differently as a buyer's agent and as a seller's agent, and sort of what your process is when you work with your clients. So please join us after this break. You're listening to Making Change Radio here on Radio Fairfax.
Choose radio. Choose a big stereo. Choose loudspeakers, car hi-fi, compact disc players, and electrical antennas. Choose sitting on that couch listening to mind-numbing, spirit-crushing commercial radio shows. I chose something else. And the reasons? There are no reasons. Who needs reasons when you've got Fairfax County's own freeform radio station that's always commercial-free? It's your station. Use it.
Area 22 is an exciting mix of music for those who walk down a different path. A bit of the familiar with a bit of the obscure. Area 22, Wednesday night at 6 on Radio Fairfax.
This is Juliette Riley, Chief Excavator of The Big Dig. Join me Tuesdays at 4 p.m. as we dig deep on a musical expedition to explore the inspirations and descendants of the rock and roll greats. That's The Big Dig, Tuesdays at 4 on Radio Fairfax.
We're the Census Bureau. We measure America. So if you receive a survey from the Census Bureau, please participate right away. Your community is counting on you.
Hey, sweetie, what did you learn in school today?
I learned that the 2020 census counts everyone in the U.S. Where there are more people, there are more needs for things like roads, schools, and hospitals.
I learned that billions in funding goes to communities like ours because of the census. Hundreds of billions.
I learned that the Census Bureau collects data about communities in all states and territories of the U.S.
The Statistics in Schools program teaches preschool to high school students about the importance of a complete count in the 2020 census. A complete count informs federal funding for our communities for the next decade. When newborn babies and children are not counted, support for programs such as health insurance, hospitals, childcare, food assistance, schools, and early childhood development is impacted. Statistics in Schools offers free educational materials powered by census data. Shape your future. Start here. Get 2020 census resources at census.gov/schools.
Paid for by the U.S. Census Bureau.
The radio programs aired by FPA and reflect the viewpoints of individual producers and do not necessarily represent those of the station, its staff, or supporters.
Radio Fairfax is your station, so use it. Listen on your television, computer, or mobile device. Radio Fairfax, what you want to hear, where you want to hear it.
Welcome back to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Nancy Pav, who is the president-elect of the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. Our subject tonight is real estate in the age of pandemic. Thanks so much for taking time out to talk with all of us tonight, Nancy.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying it so far.
It is. It's interesting. I think most people rarely buy and sell houses. I think it used to be back in the day that it was every 7 to 10 years somebody would buy or sell a home. It might be more frequent than that now. But the fact of the matter is most of us don't do it very often, and therefore starting a transaction means that you're starting from scratch and trying to understand how the whole process has changed since the last time you did it. And as we talked about earlier, over 30 years, that process has changed a lot. A lot of it now is online, it's digital, it's mobile. There's not as much paper. Things like checks. In this age of pandemic, cashier's checks. Explain to us a little bit about how people are managing to adapt to this new world where it's very difficult to put your hands on paper, generate paper, be inside buildings, and that sort of thing.
So I'm going to step a little bit further back and talk about so you need a check when you buy a house, or you need money several times when you buy a house, but the first time is when you put a contract on a property. That's your earnest money deposit. And that typically that can be a personal check. That's not a problem. But with the pandemic, that's a little bit more problematic. And so they now have apps that you can actually take a picture. You can write the check, take a picture of it, and it gets directly deposited into the settlement company's bank account. So it's
That's
much
amazing.
more secure. I know. And it doesn't get lost. It's more secure. Also, the listing agent gets an email saying that the check was delivered, which is part of the contract. The listing agent needs to know that that the check was delivered. So we get that as well. In terms of closing, years ago we had to provide cashier's checks. Well, unfortunately, with the good of technology comes the bad of technology, and the bad of technology is hackers. And so people were starting to make fraudulent cashier's checks. So settlement companies have stopped using cashier's checks primarily, and now they're requiring the funds to be sent wire transferred. I will tell people this is very important, that always reconfirm where the wire is going so that you don't get caught where your money goes somewhere it's not supposed to go. So your agent should never be giving you information about where the money is to go. Always when it comes to money, always pick up the phone and ask and confirm with either your agent or the settlement company, because people have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars wiring the funds, and once it's gone, it's not coming back. So make sure to double check when it comes to where your money goes.
Well, that is a tremendous cautionary tale, because you're right. The more sophisticated the tools have gotten to be to facilitate this, the phishing scams, the hackers have figured out they're 2 steps ahead in figuring out how to scam people out of their money and to misdirect these funds. So I know that when we purchased this house, everything was done through secure email with our mortgage lender and with the settlement company. We logged in and everything was a secure communication. And so these are the kinds of things, again, that you sort of need somebody who's representing you to walk you through finding the people and how it's done and walking you through using the tools. Tom and I need a little help with that sometimes about the tools. And so, again, this comes back to making sure that you have gotten or connected with a professional realtor. Let's talk a little bit about the realtor designation and where that comes from. A lot of people see realtor and they see the registered trademark sign. Give us a little bit of background about that designation of realtor, and then walk us through a little bit of what the Virginia Association of Realtors and the local Association of Realtors, what they do and why they exist in the real estate industry.
Okay, so the realtor designation, really, what it really says to the consumer is that you are a member of the National Association of Realtors. The realtors, so to start with, in Virginia, you need to be licensed to sell real estate. The state of Virginia provides us a license. We have to take tests in order to get our license, and then our license actually hangs with our broker, but the state controls our license and tells us what we can do and how we can do it. If you're in certain parts of Virginia, you do not need to be a realtor. Well, technically, you don't need to be a realtor to sell real estate, but you do need to be licensed. That's very important. But in order to be a realtor, you need to belong to the National Association of Realtors, and you need to take continuing education, one of which is ethics. Realtors also have to abide by the code of ethics. It's how we treat our consumer, whether it's our client or our customer, and it's also how we treat one another as an agent. If for some reason someone violates the code of ethics, they can be fined. So typically, there's two ways that you can get fines as a realtor. One is if you violate the code of ethics, and that is done at your local board level. So for me, it's the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. It could be the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors. That is where you could go, and a consumer can actually file a complaint against a realtor, as well as a realtor against another realtor for violating the code. And then the state, if you violate state laws, then you have a different problem. I call that going to realtor jail. So if anyone ever asks me to do something that's not right, I go, oh, I'm not going to realtor jail. I don't look good in orange jumpsuits, and I am not going to realtor jail. So, so for the consumer, what a realtor's job is to follow the code of ethics, treat people fairly, and we could be penalized, and you do that through the local association.
The association, the Dulles Area Association of Realtors, is a professional association. So you're a member. You join that particular association of realtors. You pay dues, and there is a staff there, and yes, there are services, and there are membership benefits to being a member of a real estate association. So why would somebody choose to join, and why would somebody choose not to join, actually, under the circumstances?
So to some degree, you're required to join in this area in order to have access to properties. So all of the I would say the majority of the brokerages, I really don't know of any brokerage that is not a member of an association. In order to work at that brokerage, you need to be a member of an association. But the benefits for an agent is severalfold. You can take your continuing education classes through your local association. You can take the Dulles Area Association of Realtors every year has a economic summit where we have presenters from the National Association of Realtors, the Builders Association, different places, George Mason. They'll come and present the economic, the forecast for what's going to happen with real estate in the coming year. Of course, that kind of got skewed with the pandemic and changed things a little bit. But so you have educational opportunities both on the local, the state, and the national level, because when you're a member of a local association, you automatically become a member of the state association and of the national association. So, for example, because everyone is at home now, the National Association of Realtors is offering designations for 50% off. And there's actually one designation, I think it's the ePro designation, that is free. So you can get a designation for free. So that just builds the more you learn as a realtor, the better you are. And the better you are, the better you can serve your clients. So that is really why you want to be a member of an association.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me. And for those of you who are just joining us, you're listening to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Nancy Pav, who is the president-elect of the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. She's also a longtime realtor here in Northern Virginia, and she goes back to the mid-90s as far as selling real estate in this area, and she's been my realtor. And so I think as we talk about the transactions that are happening and what you're seeing, we need to remind people that not only is it possible to sell a home and to buy a home, but it's also possible to start a real estate career, which I think a lot of people would be like, why in the world would you become a real estate agent right now? But people will always have to buy and sell homes. And life goes on. People get relocated out of the area. People have to relocate into the area. There's just a lot of life cycle situations that require buying and selling homes in this area. So talk a little bit, Nancy, about, your choice to be a real estate agent, why you decided on this particular career and what kind of the positives and the perhaps negatives are of choosing a career in real estate.
So I think, when you told me that was one of the questions, I sort of had to dig deep. My grandmother was self-employed. My dad was self-employed, and I chose that route as well. So I think it's a family thing. Neither of them were realtors, but they were both self-employed. But what really sort of attracted me to real estate was when my parents sold their house in upstate New York. And I don't know what it was about it, but I think that was when I got hooked. I was in college. That was when the light bulb went on. And I started out in new homes, which is great, and then switched over to general brokerage in 1997. I was a young mom at the time, and I had the ability to work around my children's schedules. So I liked it for that reason. I also like it for the fact that you're doing the same thing, but not quite the same way. So I'm not sitting in an office constantly. I could be working from home in the morning. This is before the pandemic, of course. I could be working from home in the morning and then out looking at properties in the afternoon, or meeting with people, or doing all sorts of different things. And not every day is the same, which I really like, so I think being a realtor is a great profession for someone who doesn't necessarily want to be in an office all day and likes to work with people. It's not, and interestingly, real estate is not about the houses as much as it's about the people. There's all sorts of different houses out there, and you don't have to sell a house that you like or would want to move in, right? You're selling a house that somebody needs to sell, regardless of what it looks like. So the only thing I would say to people who are interested, real estate is a hard business because it is people skills, and it is getting people to work with you to buy or sell a house. The biggest thing that you need to understand is, even though your license hangs with a broker, you are an independent contractor. So all the money that comes in, nobody's paying Uncle Sam except for you. So you're responsible for making sure your taxes get paid. You're responsible for, if you don't have health insurance, to get your own health insurance. So you really are a sole proprietor in essence. It's all on you.
And talking about, the people skills involved here, I've often said that it seems to me that real estate agents are sort of part therapist, part marriage counselor. It's a very emotional process, whether you're on the buying side or you're purchasing a house. It's a very emotional experience, and a lot of time people have feelings about their houses. Tom, my husband and I constantly, go back and forth about what we think the value of our house is, and it's not really how we feel about it or how much we think we've invested in making it nicer. It comes down to how we emotionally are attached to our home. And this is the other piece where I think the emotional intelligence of real estate professionals really comes into play in helping people work through their own processes that really don't have to do with the objective value of a particular house or condo, but, navigating the process of letting go of it or having to understand what the market says your beloved house is worth, and making compromises, especially when you've got two people who have different ideas about what they want their home to look like. So my hat is off to the real estate agents I have known who do this so well.
So it's interesting because I think that what's interesting about real estate is there's an emotional component to it, and there is a business component to it. And you do have to go back and forth between each side of that fence to help people get where they need to go. Some people are very emotional about their homes. If someone has lived in their home for 40 years and raised their kids, it's harder to make that move, right? And you have to understand that. For some people, if they're relocating into the area, maybe they don't want to be here, or they're coming from an area where they could get so much more for their money, and when they come to this area, they find out what they're buying, and they are not happy. So, we do our best, but oftentimes I think of, as we were talking, I was thinking of people that I'll show a house and we walk in and it's written all over their face how they don't like the house. And the husband will be like, well, that's great. And I go, your wife doesn't like it. And they have no clue. And so it really is, it's partly reading people, it's partly being sympathetic, but, at the end of the day, a house, my former manager, Dennis Bruce, had said that once you put your house on the market, it is now a commodity. It's no longer a home, it's a product for sale. And it's hard for homeowners to think that way, but it really helps if you can, because buyers will tell you what their number is. And you could want a certain number, but if everybody thinks it's worth less, the buyer controls what the house will sell for, because if they're not going to buy it for your number, that's why you see houses sitting on the market, is because the house is higher than what a buyer is willing to spend for that particular product.
There are definitely strategies around how you price a home for what the seller does or doesn't want to do and where it is. So when you helped me to sell a house in 2016, I decided not to make improvements to it. I knew that it needed work, and so I was going to let the buyers do the work on that house. So I had to price it for the fact that it had good bones and it was in a good neighborhood, but it was not going to be something that was necessarily move-in ready for the next owners. And, you and I worked on that strategy, and we worked on the pricing, and we found a buyer right away. And through a most unusual circumstance of somebody who was familiar with this neighborhood and who was overseas with the State Department, ended up buying that house through an iPad tour their agent gave them. So the whole thing was kind of unusual, but it shows what is possible if you're willing to understand how the market works.
That's correct. And I think it's also incumbent upon the agent to set expectations. So one of the expectations we had that for your house, I remember saying to you, we might have to kiss a couple frogs before we get to our prince. Not everybody understands an as-is sale, and they may ask for things even though we told them it was as-is. So setting expectations for the people in the transaction is really helpful to to make sure that it's smooth. If you don't set expectations, that's when you have problems.
And that's too where, again, you've got an agent on the other side representing buyers who also have to set expectations for buyers and work with the listing agent so that everybody understands what the main components of the transaction really are. And this is where having a good real estate agent really can make the difference as to whether you get the house you want.
Exactly. And also, everybody needs to understand the goal of the transaction. The goal is to sell the house, right, or buy the house, whichever the case may be. And I don't think we're always going to get everything we want in a transaction, but we need to focus on the end goal. So sometimes some agents will allow their egos to get in the way and I have heard it said that agents can mess up a transaction, which I think is true, but we need to get our egos out of the way and realize that it really is just about what the buyer and the seller want. Seller wants to sell and the buyer wants to buy. Well, let's get them there the best way we can.
Those are words to live by. And for those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed. And tonight we're talking with Nancy Pav, who is the president-elect of the Dulles Area Association of Realtors. And we are talking about real estate in the age of pandemic. So some parting words for all of us, Nancy, about what you would say about, buying and selling. Is it feasible? Is it possible? Is it still a good idea in the middle of this pandemic? And a real estate career, is it something people should seriously consider as a rewarding professional career?
So in terms of buying and selling during the pandemic, I would say yes, it's definitely doable with caveats though. If you're in a group that may be susceptible to getting sick and going to the hospital, then maybe you should not be putting your house on the market right now. I think you need to think long and hard about that. But if you're not in that group and you are ready to go, it can be done. Your realtor can help you get it done in a safe manner. In terms of getting into real estate, I would say, if not now, then when? The economists are predicting that as soon as this is over, the market is going to go back up since we have a shortage of inventory. The time is now, and you have the opportunities to take classes and review materials and really soak in information as you're ramping up your business. So I would say yes, now is the time.
And as far as looking for information online, and I'm sure a lot of people, I have Zillow alerts set up. In fact, that's how I found the house I'm sitting in right now, is through a Zillow alert. Tell us a little bit about how people should use some of these online tools.
So I would say that there are a bunch of different websites you can look at. There's Realtor.com, there's Zillow, there's Trulia. Some of them, Zillow specifically, is not a super accurate tool. I was helping a buyer a couple years ago, and his dad was looking at properties, and he found one that had been on the market for 10 years on Zillow. Okay, well, that house had long been sold. So it's not a great tool for looking for when you're buying a house. You're better off looking at either your agent's website or their company's website, or Bright MLS has a consumer-facing website where you can look at properties. These are very accurate. They show you when a house is active, when it's under contract. That is the most accurate data you're going to find, because that's the data that we, the agents, input into the system. Zillow can be used for getting an idea of what the value of your home is, but take that with a grain of salt and understand that they have it's not super accurate. It used to be, years ago, it used to be a 33% plus or minus. That's a lot. That's a huge differential. It depends on where the house is located too. Listen, if you're in a condo, probably it's going to be pretty good. If you're in a neighborhood that's got, let's say it's a transitional neighborhood where houses are changing and there's $1 million house next to a $250,000 house, Zillow's not going to be super accurate. So I would lean more on the data that your realtor provides you, because that's going to be closer to the property, more accurate, and more timely.
And we should probably point out, too, that if you're taking out a mortgage on your property, if you're taking out a loan to buy a property, the property has to appraise at least at the value of the property that you're buying. And that's the other reason that running comps, the comparables in a neighborhood, and getting that number right is so important if people are borrowing money in order to purchase a house. That's true. And, and we were talking about why you would use a realtor. One of the things, a realtor, a listing agent, if I'm getting ready to list a home, I make sure to know everything that's on the market around that property. And if possible, I go into the property. Well, if a property has a smell, let's say it smells like cigarette smoke. Homes that smell like cigarette smoke do not sell for as much money as a house that doesn't smell like cigarette smoke. So I can, if I'm talking to an appraiser, so the value of two similarly sized properties is going to be very skewed, right? Well, I can tell the appraiser why that house sold for less. If he's using that as a comp, I can say, well, that house smells, or that was a divorce situation, or I might know, or it looks better in pictures than it does in person. Zillow can't tell you that a house smells. We haven't gotten that technology yet, right? So I can tell you what a house feels like. Feels like is maybe subjective, but I can definitely tell you what it smells like. And the condition of the property as compared to the pictures. And that helps the appraisers do their jobs. Zillow just can't do that and give you good data. So that is something that people need to understand is an important part of the equation, no matter what side of the transaction you're on. So I just want to say thank you so much, Nancy. This has been very informative. I hope our listeners have found this to be very informative too. Thank you so much for joining us here on Making Change Radio on Radio Fairfax.